Instructional Designers in Offices Drinking Coffee is brought to you by Domino, makers of Domino One, the all-in-one, cloud-based e-learning authoring tool for teams. You can learn more at domino.com. Now, here's this week's episode.
Good morning, everybody. It must be Wednesday.
Oh,
It's hard to start the day without that music, you know? It's like Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays just there's a lull all week long except
Sad.
Wednesdays.
Sad without it.
Yep, it's. But you know, absence makes the heart grow fonder. We appreciate it
yes.
more by having been denied it the rest of the week, right?
That's right.
We value it more.
It's a hump day
you know.
thing, too. Look at that. Who do we have in the chat? Look at all these folks from all over the place joining us today. Wow. It's an epic crew, as usual.
Yeah. It sounds like, well, unless you're in the UK and Ireland and England chiming in, that the weather is challenging today, but it looks like most folks are claiming a good weather day. That's a lot of fun. Excellent.
Sunny and hot in Arizona, so I can tell you that.
Surprise!
Doesn't change too much around
Weird.
here.
Weird. That's unusual.
Right? It's so odd. I'm not too sure how to deal with it today.
Yeah.
But hey,
Put another
right
hoodie
now-
on.
Yeah, sure, right. Woo-ha. Yeah, well, we got the AC cranked down to something below freezing, so we'll figure it out. But that's not why we're here today. We got a guest hanging out with us today. Chris, who's talking with us today?
Well, folks, we have Matthew Daniel joining us. Matthew, it's your first time with us here. So introduce yourself to the folks. Give us your superhero origin story.
Oh, here it is. I have spent almost 20 years in the learning and talent development space. I'm based here in the States, and I live in Nashville now, but I've spent a number of years traveling the U.S. working with large organizations on their learning design, learning strategy, different areas. I started with a company called GP Strategies and spent a number of years at GP working in the public space, DoD, Homeland Security, Cigna, Microsoft, lots of different places, industry verticals, and designing programs and implementing learning systems for folks. And then 6 years in-house at Capital One, leading learning design, learning technology, learning innovation. And then went on my own and consulted and really started to focus on talent strategy, talent development strategy, overarching. And today I work for Guild Education, where I am a principal focused on talent mobility and talent strategy. My origin story is that of one who believes that they want to change the world. They need to make money. They need to make money. I would rather go live and work in a nonprofit all my life, make dirt and change the world that way. But I found that I could be in the learning and talent development space and actively contribute to the lives of people and still have a corporate paycheck. And that was the compromise I made, was to have a corporate paycheck and to try and make the world better through learning and talent development.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? That trying to make the world better is a kind of undercurrent for so many of us in our space. We really are, a helping, caring kind of bunch of folks, which is the best bunch of folks to hang out with on a regular basis, for sure. Yeah. So talking about helping, caring, changing the world. We're not talking about designing things or making things or that kind of a thing today. That kind of a thing. What's the thing? No, but we are talking about something sort of broader. We're talking about work that we can do, things that we can do to help people succeed in our space. And we've seen a lot of discussions, COVID times wise, of people the great resignation, et cetera, that sometimes phrased, and lots of folks have shifted careers. Lots of folks have had careers yanked out from underneath them too, because of COVID as well. But that's our topic today. We're talking about, things that we can do to help support the people we work with and the people who, work on our teams, and that kind of a sound. And it sounds to me like you have certainly worked in a number of different places that would give you a lot of glimpses to all kinds of different, types of teams and different corporate cultures, et cetera.
Yeah.
What point did you, sort of shift into this kind of, more of a focus of this kind of space, and how did that come about?
Yeah, I think when we start talking about mobility, I think I'm certainly focused on mobility from those within our field, and making sure that the folks who are here are growing with the times. I care deeply about our field continuing to evolve to meet a changing context. Ultimately, where I became really passionate about it was when I was at Capital One. We were going through our own digital transformation. And what that resulted in is there were a lot of jobs that people had that were no longer relevant. We had decided, we were using technology. We were changing more automated processes. We were changing the way everything from the phone system work for more self-service to, in the learning and technology space, less operations of people touching systems and updating those. And so ultimately, as a part of that digital transformation, we found that we were doing three things when it came to mobility. We were trying to help people who their role had been automated or gone away, and how were we going to help them do that? We had people who it was the same job, but essentially the responsibilities had evolved pretty dramatically. And so it literally just got a new title. The position existed, it just got a new title. And what was an instructional designer became a learning experience designer, but that's not just a fancy title. That's actually a change in what's expected of you. And then I think finally the third one is people who stayed in the exact same role that they had always been in, same title, but the expectations of what skills they needed to have for that job had changed pretty dramatically and were forecasted to change even more dramatically. I think something like over the next 5 years, any role that you have, approximately 40% of those skills are going to evolve. So when you're living through that much of a transformation, and we were just on the cusp of it then, you're trying to figure out, again, if you care about people, you're trying to help people stay, help people find new opportunities, reskill for the future. And so what had been a business analyst was becoming a data scientist role. And what was a learning designer was becoming instructional systems designer. So it's everywhere. You're just trying to figure out how to make sure that people had the tools they need to transition.
Yeah.
How did you figure that out? I mean,
to a certain degree, sometimes the business tells you that, right? Like the business says, oh, we're deprecating this system at the end of the year. We got to figure this out. And sometimes what you do is you realize, I think for me, there was all the clients we were serving external to learning that we saw the transition happening. I think in learning, there was no one who came and said, this is what you need to do. But what was obvious was, and I'll just use the learning roles because they're such a good proxy for what was happening everywhere, which was this expectation of human-centered design, right? Folks started talking about human-centered design, about design thinking, and it started to infiltrate the business. And if you're paying attention, no matter what role you're in, you're going, oh hell, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my group? How are my systems changing? How are my competencies changing? And so the business believed a lot more of the credibility. And I'll go back to learning design for a second, being that if you had the voice of the learner built into the design methodology, which some folks would have always told you was critical, that the emphasis on design thinking really drove that home. And so for my own teams, I said, hey, there's some new roles we're going to create. We're going to have a full-time curator of learning. Like this was, Elliot Macy had just written an article not too long before that in CLO that had been about the role of curator as a new role in the organization. And I thought, hell, I'm going to try that. Let's see what are the competencies that person has? How do they plug into other teams? And then it turns out that competency got baked everywhere. Everybody needed to know how to curate from content that was available, in addition to, designing context to go around it. So all of that, you're just watching the times. I think, in my own job today, why do I focus so much on mobility in my role at Guild? Is because the entire space around HR and human capital, the platforms that are out there, they're being adopted, the places where the market is going, everybody is screaming, hey, we've got to have different talent. That led me to looking at the data. And the data is absolutely insane at the growth of fields, that the pipeline from colleges just isn't there. And so ultimately, how am I going to develop that talent in my own shop, in my own workplace, versus trying to go recruit that talent? So anyway, it was just an evolution that happened in me as I was watching the context around me change, the skills I needed, and started trying to bring people along with that journey and figure out how to make it a business strategy rather than just a HR or learning talent strategy.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
I love the idea of thinking of our work as, helping people be mobile, right? And being helpful in other people's career, as opposed to, we often look at the work that we do as solving a problem, right? Like there's something is broken and, the business, somebody, I don't know, makes a mistake, fails at something. So we have to retrain everybody so that we make sure that mistake doesn't happen again. Like situations like that to have a tendency, I think, to overshadow everything else that we do. And I think one of the reasons why I think it's important that we talk about this and helping people to understand that there are those moments of creating training and creating courses and creating pipelines and giving people courses that allow them to improve and move on to other roles in this world that's changing so rapidly, I think helps reframe the work a little bit that we do, right?
Yeah, I would hope that it does, right? So I think when we imagine that we're out creating courses, programs, learning, what we think that we're doing is developing skills in people. I mean, we're solving a business problem, but hopefully we're solving it with developing skills into the people that, are consuming those things we're creating or curating or whatever that is. So I ended up spending a bit of time working on, like, there's this catch-all phrase that ends up getting thrown out there, is learning is upskilling. We're upskilling people. And we use a framework often at Guild where we talk about what is the job to be done. This is just a general consulting philosophy, which is, if I'm going to create a slide, or I'm going to create a course, or I'm going to stand up a meeting, what's the job to be done of that? So when people use the word upskilling, what is the job to be done of upskilling? What are they trying to do? And it is those three jobs I talked about a moment ago. I break it down into, you're upskilling for people who are going to stay in their role and need to increase skills. You're reskilling people from one role into another. You're reskilling people into the same role, but it has fundamentally changed underneath them. And so when I think about skilling overall, the other thing I'm thinking in, and if you can't hear, I think in frameworks. Like, this is where my brain goes all the time. There was a Burson paper a couple years ago. It came out of a separate set of research where we really started to talk about the half-life of skills, how long skills last, and that the frame was the half-life of a skill, or if you aren't familiar with that phrase, you don't remember back to chemistry. The value of a skill taught diminishes by 50% over the course of 5 years. That was the working theory. And the more technical the skill, that half-life was closer to 2 or 2.5 years. So it loses its value by 50% over 2 or 2.5 years. And I think what that did is it created in our community, in the learning community, this excuse to, like, create nonstop, generate throwaway content as a means of operating. We just needed to essentially find ways to pump out more and more content more and more rapidly to answer business needs. And that's not a bad thing. It's actually really, in today's context, you've got to be able to respond quickly to the needs of the business, to the needs of your learners. But ultimately, the question I started asking myself is, are all skills made equal? Like, if skills are the currency of the 21st century, which is a phrase that I've heard a number of times, is all currency the same value? Are all skills the same value? Or are there some skills that hold more value for a longer time? If I'm going to develop a course, I don't know if you guys remember this. When I started in learning, you didn't do an e-learning asset if we didn't think that course in the LMS was going to hold 3 years. Like, if it wouldn't stay for 3 years with minimal maintenance, it wasn't going up. I don't know if y'all remember those days, but there were those days. Oh, yeah. And now we generate an e-learning course to pump out for a day as part of a communication plan, not really learning, that we all know is going to get thrown away at the end of the day. And so all skills don't hold the same value. Reskilling requires that, like, I build fundamental skills in people. So let me, again, I'm going to get to your question, but do it one more different way. If skills hold different value for a different amount of time, then I have to be really thoughtful about how I mix these up. I think in a response to the recession, again, I go a little heady. In response to the recession, 2008, 2009, 2010, it was like, how much content can we crank out? How much can we make sure that there's no superfluous content in it? Like, you only have in this course the things you need to know to go do the things that you need to do today, right? Which is really perishable. Everything that's going on the shelf at the store goes bad in a day. In that mindset, the better frame in my mind is this mixture of, how do I give you the tools to do what you need to do today? Because you know what, a call center rep needs to know what button to hit today in the system to get people routed where they need. Right? That is a highly perishable skill. It's going to change next week when they upgrade the system, but I need to help people with it. But there are also skills that are really durable. Things like communication, problem solving, and those really durable skills. How do I make sure that every time I'm going to my learners with a solution, that I'm doing the right balancing of highly durable skills that are going to last for a really long time, and answering the perishable skills about the job that they need to go do today. The better I do it at durable learning, at durable skills, the longer the time that those people are going to be able to solve problems in their job, and the less maintenance I have to do in the form of, like, constant iterative delivery to people. So here's my last plug on this thought about how I think about it is, ultimately, we tend to focus our highly perishable content for folks who are hourly folks, for folks who are in call centers, are using systems, and we take our deep, durable skills and we hand that to leaders and managers and executives. And so in that system, we actually create a tiered approach to how we develop people that reinforces bias in the system. Like, it just replicates people not being valuable in their workplace, while other people are perceived as super valuable. And, like, the only people who can stand and say, hey, are we developing skills in an equitable way that actually creates talent pipelines for the future and enable these folks to move? Like, are we just paying folks from the skills company store? I live in Tennessee, in Appalachia, they used to talk about mining towns and the company store, and you got paid in money that can only be used in your own town. And I think learning folks are at high risk of paying folks from the skills company store, as in, here's the really perishable skill that you can only use here. It's our system, it's our platform, and not thinking to ourselves, are we actually creating durable skills that we invest in people that can translate when their job disappears, when their system is deprecated, when things transition? Are we creating the kind of equitable skill development that lets people pursue new opportunities in time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, are we just simply teaching people to commit to tasks by rote, following an exact plan, or are we actually, as part of this, also equipping them to be ready to change, even if those set of tasks change, but also moving into other levels of responsibility? So is part of the solution is that you are, let's say, we're doing some sort of program for a set of tasks, etc. Are we trying to embed that other stuff then as part of that same thing, or is it simply that we're giving the skills more training, but also making sure that folks get communication training and that sort of thing in addition to that core functional stuff?
It's a critical question, right? So it's not like, let's go develop a new curriculum focused on communication. That's not the way I think of it. But like, if I am, and again, this goes back to the challenge of like, we've done as small a training course as we possibly can that focuses on the task at hand, is if I can intentionally design a course that connects the why to what I'm doing, which again, some learning designers have been doing since the beginning of time, but a lot of organizations, a lot of that got trimmed back. And so how can I both, and I'll give you an example. Let's say that you've been asked to roll out Jira in your workplace, which is an agile tool, right? Like from a standpoint of how do I manage my work through sprints or Kanban or whatever the methodology is. So I could do a couple different things. I could essentially put out a 5-minute course or program on how you enter into Jira the task that you're responsible for and tie it to another task, right? I could do that. As a matter of fact, if you look on a job description, it might say agile, like somebody needs to know agile. And what they really mean is, you know how to enter a new story into Jira. But that's not it. If all I teach you is how to enter a new story into Jira, when our platform changes again, when the workflow changes in Jira, now I'm pushing out another piece of training. So if I go one level above that, I call these semi-durable skills. Like, what's the framework I'm using to make a decision about what's a story versus what's a epic, et cetera. And then if I go one more level above that, which is what I'm really trying to do is to help you think with Jira, if I'm going to deliver this really big solution, iterative with one thing today, that's what Agile is. How do I deliver the really big thing in small sprints today? So instead of just pushing out a course where I'm saying to you, here's how you click this button to create a story in Jira, what I actually then do is say, and here's how why those stories matter. This is how they're arranged. And even further than that, here's how I make a decision about what becomes a story. So now I've got agile thinking. What do I make a decision about what becomes a story? How do I think of what goes at a story or another level? And then finally, here's how I enter the story in the platform. The learning doesn't have to get that much longer to give people the context and develop a more durable skill that's going to hang around even as the platform changes.
So here's an extension on that a little bit. I mean, we have a whole room full of instructional designers and corporate managers. And how do we square that up with our instructional design skills, right? Like our traditional instructional design, instructional objective approach would tell us to separate those things, right? I think there's a reason why we've done it the way we've done it for so long, and maybe haven't integrated the different levels and set it right. Like we'll do a course on agile thinking, and then there'll be a totally separate course on how do you do it in Jira, right? Versus something else. And so it's all separated. And I think what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that integrating that might be a better approach, or in some sense, just figuring out how to keep those elements closer together so that there is a sense of connection.
Yeah, that you've got it right. That is exactly what I'm suggesting is a more integrated approach. I think why have we? I think you ask a question, and again, I'm going to go philosophical for a second, because I think if what we do is teach our own learning folks. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you being on. Hi, everybody else. It's really quiet over there in chat. Like I just want to say hi to the folks who are on. Okay, so I'm going to be philosophical for a second, because I think that point that I was making earlier is really important. I think I'm going to go to like broader systemic. Where are we in culture? And I think we have been both relegated as learning folks that what we do doesn't always matter. What we do is create courses, pump out new content. And I think the reason is because what we do is like tell people the 5 steps that they need to go execute on. And why do we give them the 5 steps? Well, because the business told us you get 5 minutes for training. Like if we think about why we ended up with a course that's set on context and a source that's set on tasks, I think the reason is not because we thought that was the best approach. If I'm a historian by degree, one of my favorite classes is like historiography, the study of history, and like how the story gets changed over time depending on the voice that's telling it. And so I think we tell ourselves we've separated this out because we imagine that it needs to look like this. But in truth, people are going to function better if they understand the context behind the task, not just the steps I need to go do. Why am I doing this? How can I think about doing it better? Look, the more automated the task, the higher the likelihood that person can be displaced. The moment that your folks are like, oh, we're going to script this out in perfection, then you're only a couple of steps from AI taking away that job. And so ultimately, what I think is that we have got to become this kind of intermediary who says we can't just teach to the task. We can't just create a course on steps. We actually have to think about what the integrated version of what we're creating. Everybody, I'll go this far. I think the skills shortage that exists today, the World Economic Forum, WEF, talks nonstop about skill shortages. And I don't know for sure, I can't objectively say this, but I think we, learning professionals, have a part to play in why the skills shortage exists. And the reason I think that is because I think we have allowed ourselves to be narrowed down to the least common denominator on what should go in our learning programs, instead of saying, no, we need to give them context. We need to make sure they actually understand why they're pulling the lever, not just that they know how to pull the lever. If I teach them why they're pulling the lever and I develop those durable skills, then I don't have so much of the skill shortage. But if what I allow myself to do is be managed down to the task, then what I have is an entire workforce that's short on its ability to think critically, to communicate clearly. Those are really common skills that are needed across the talent stack that ultimately we're not developing because we, especially at the front lines, are saying, here's the task, go do. Here's the task, go do. So I think that it is less about, we think that it's more effective for learning to just teach to the task than we've been shaped by the context of business and managing to the least common denominator as the demand of fill my 10 minutes. This is what you have boxed in for your e-learning.
Jamie's tossed into, actually, and Terry has just echoed it. So
Hi,
Jamie's
folks.
saying
I love it.
Jamie's saying in the chat, I find convincing the people in charge, and the people in charge is in caps. I love that context is important. Convincing them that the convincing of that is a hard task. And Terry's asking, how do you negotiate with the business owner for the extra time needed to build in the why for the training? And both of those comments, reflect something that I was thinking of too, that we're talking about the history, of our space. And so many of us have been, we learn what we do by, osmosis or apprenticeship from the folks around us when we come into the L&D space, right? And so we're living up to the historical models in a sense, really, of what L&D does. Yeah. And how do we, take these conversations forward and can try to convince people that there needs to be some changes? How do you start taking this particular aspect of the conversation to that other level to get buy-in and to get and to get support for this?
Yeah, I feel like Sarah was itching to type a response here. If you haven't read Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, I think it gives you a whole lot of Sarah here is talking about the TED Talk that kind of is a synopsis of that. And so I think there are a couple of reasons. I think here's the deal. There are a couple different ways that I would go with this. If I had business, and you have to be in it for the long haul, right? You're trying to change your business leader's belief about what should go in learning. And they obviously have a point of view that's probably informed by their own experience. Let me give you 3 things that I would do. Number 1, I would start with the business case of missing skills. Like literally, if we don't have skills for the future, we are trying to buy talent off the market that we should be developing in-house. And buying talent is immensely more expensive than developing our own talent. So from a business case standpoint, I would start to work in language around the case for upskilling as opposed to the case for buying talent. Secondly, I would go to a different place, which is the voice of the learner themselves. This comes back to that human-centered design. There's a part of business leaders who actually think that the reason they need to train to task is because they've also heard learners themselves say, learning's too long, it's too boring, there's too much stuff in this. And so there was an edit out, there was a bleep there. And so I think we actually need to combat that paradigm with the voice of the learners themselves, where if you go spend time with the learner, you're doing a true like empathetic interview with folks. And the D School out of Stanford has a lot of good stuff about empathetic designing techniques. You're asking a series of questions to say, hey, what is it that you're looking for? What do you need? What is the support that we can provide to you? You will find over and over a trend from those learners where they want to understand why. They want to understand context. No, they're not asking for a half-hour e-learning course. Like, you're never going to hear them say, can I please sit longer in an e-learning module? You're never going to have that happen, ever. Nobody in the business is ever like, yes, another required training course. I can't wait. What a gift to my week. That doesn't happen. But what they are saying is, why am I doing this? And how's it going to change? Why are things this way? There was a third, what was I going to say? 1, business case. 2, voice of the learner. 3, I don't know, but the 2 are enough for now.
It's a good start. For sure.
That works. That works. It'll pop in your head as soon as we go off the air.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly.
No, those are great. And I think... So I start trying to think practically, right? When we start having these conversations, whenever we do an idiotic where we're talking strategic stuff like this and thinking philosophically and getting up in the clouds, first thing I always start to think about is, okay, then how do
some of us got to do something with all this.
Yeah. How do we influence this, or how do we start talking to folks about it a little bit more? And is it something as big as maybe we need to start changing our instructional design practices? And maybe that needs to be bent and twisted a little bit to say, hey, you know what? It's okay to include the why and all of these other elements, even if it doesn't apply to the instructional objective, right? We've been it's been pounded into our head for so long.
Add the instructional objective in, right? Well, I don't look, this is how long it's been since I've designed a course. Back when I started in learning design, he says as if he's 80, we talked about 2 different things. We talked about enabling objectives and terminal objectives. I don't even know if that language is still used.
It is.
The terminal objectives, I would say to you that the enabling objective of both the task itself and the context of the task are necessary for the terminal objective to be achieved. If what I deliver is the enabling objective around task, I think, as my wife and I frequently say, write yourself out of the problem. If you don't have an objective that says something around applying, I think we leave our objectives at this, perform the task level.
Yeah.
I think there is whether or not you love Bloom's or whatever, there's a new depth that you can go to, which is apply and contrast. Take those concepts of why I'm doing this task and write yourself out of the problem with an enabling objective or a learning objective that actually is about how I can use this to make change, to respond to an out of the box scenario, how I can use this moment to see broader than the perspective that I have in front of me. I think I'll just give you one of my remits at Capital One was compliance training. Oh, sweet heavens, right? And in a bank, no less, right? You understand conceptually, compliance training in a bank, no fun. This was a really important part of how we started to connect beyond the task of Reg Z. We started to talk about 2 things. First, the stories of lives impacted by not following, right? We actually needed to connect the task of whether or not you are doing participating unwittingly in anti-money laundering, with the stories of lives that are impacted when AML or anti-money laundering becomes an issue. And so we saw an engagement, like we saw a spike in interest from learners whenever they started to connect the task that they had to do with the story of humans that were impacted by bad decisions in that space. And so in general, did that take longer in the e-learning? 100%, like 60 seconds. We added 60 seconds to training in that particular module. And if you're like me and you've got 47,000 people in a bank by 60 seconds, by 1 minute, that has real financial implications to the organization. Also, if connecting AML with one of those people reduces money laundering in our bank, that cost is well worth it if they connect with the content in a different way, because now they get the context of what I'm delivering. So like, I think there are ways, even in a compliance training, where you start to connect to, and that was one thing that we did, right? Like storytelling in compliance. Another thing that we did, this has nothing to do with durable skills or not, we started to work on what we call 4-door, and I'm sure it's evolved a lot by now, but it was putting in the hands of the learners the choice about whether they went through a video about the content, whether they read a 1-page summary of that content. Everybody had to validate learning through the same means to make sure that everybody was at the same level. But we had a game built into the course so that they could actually learn by just quizzing on the content over and over. So we were actually giving learners choice about how they consumed and received that content, a way to drive up. So I think there are lots of layers in what I'm talking about here, but I think that we exaggerate it to the point of believing we're going to need to put context on every page and explain. Like I'm talking about a 60-second addition to learning. I'm talking about if you're in a day-long course, I'm talking about 10 minutes into that experience to make sure that people connect with the why behind it and understand the broader thinking that they're seeing in a way that lets them then more easily transfer that skill to a new role, a new opportunity, or new platform when it comes out, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. A while ago, I won't reveal how many years ago, but I had the luxury, I would say, or the opportunity to work with a client team that was it was compliance training. It was the policy on, and the policy was fully available as a PDF. And what we were able to do, and thankfully the client team, this was their own mindset, was that we're not taking the PDF of the policy and we're not turning that into words and with forward buttons in between. No, you've got to read the policy, and the actual e-learning course was contextual then. And so the different sections all opened with a story of sort of a moral dilemma or a situation. And then the content did work through within the context of that, how the policy actually worked in real life and how you should be looking at it, beyond just simply the thou shalts, et cetera. And then closed out with a resolution, of that situation. And those were just 2 screens, really, at the beginning and the end. They were fairly simple at like you're saying, 60 seconds. We were not adding, it was not adding, hours, and we weren't, but they were scenarios to provide context and the why, really. And also to give you models of how you should, if you actually encountered this, here's a model in real life, not just a set of dry words written in legalese in a policy. So
there was one of my favorite moments. Again, I really bought wholesale into the concept of human-centered design, and so my teams, whether you're a learning technology team or a learning design team at Capital One, we spent time with learners. It is always shocking to me how far learning professionals get removed from the people that we serve. And so we did regular studies, that empathetic design. We would do user labs where we would literally go behind a one-way mirror. They couldn't see us. We would watch them interact with our platforms, with our courses. And if you want one of the more painful experiences of your career, watch a learner go through your course and give voice to how they feel as they go through everything in the course. Like, that feedback you got from a SME will not compare to how brutal the feedback is from a learner.
That's brutal.
But one of the things in one of the interviews, the guy I was interviewing said to me, like, so explain to me why we're even doing this. Why are we doing this? And I was trying to explain to him what our team did in the organization. And he said, oh, your team does compliance training. And I was like, oh, God. Yeah, here we go. And he looked at me and he said, thank you for making that humane. It used to be so painful, and it just feels humane. And I thought to myself, humane feels like a low bar for learning. But the response being like that change that we started making to both contextualizing through stories and getting them in control of the experience and the way that they consumed that content was, I think, yeah, I'm with you, Jamie. It was game changing for them. And guess what happened? The more that I did those things and brought those words from the learners, you know, when I am combining two things that I would say qual and quant, like the more that I do qualitative studies to hear from learners about what they need and expect, and combine that with quantitative studies, both learning impact and business impact, the more of a blank check that I get from the business to do the kind of work that I'm doing. Ultimately, I am creating engagement. When people start to talk, and this is, you know, at Guild, this is a lot of what we do. We're helping people figure out how to really invest in reskilling and mobility for folks. The perception change of people believing now I have opportunity in my career and I want to stay with my employer as a result of the way that they're investing in my career. It turns out, you know, I'm going to give you numbers, which are just mind-boggling for learning professionals. Walmart made a $1 billion 4-year commitment to upskilling and reskilling through like formal education. And the reason they did that is not because somebody sold them a bill of goods. They did it because they listened to their learners and they saw that they were building their own talent. And those dollars, when it comes to like return on investment for people actually retaining in the organization, were pretty darn stellar. I think, you know, LinkedIn Learning's been putting out data for years about the impact of retention for folks who are in development. Pew Research last year, 2 leading causes of why people left their jobs. Number one, not good pay. Tied with that, 61%, tied with that was didn't see development opportunities. And what they are not talking about is a 3-minute course on how to click a button in a platform. They're saying, teaching me new skills, showing me an opportunity to develop for my future. And now what I'm doing with learning is no longer just checking a box about responsibilities in a platform. It's actually giving people hope that there is development in the organization they're in. They're learning new skills. They're relevant in the context they work. And it is enough to keep them engaged and wanting to come back for more, which is pretty powerful.
Very
That
cool.
is hugely powerful, and I think it's a great place for us to wrap up in giving people hope, I think. I love that. As soon as you started going down that road, I thought, oh, if we don't just stop right here, I think this is too good. It's too good. It's like you just crushed it, so.
Be the change you want to see in the world. That's what I say.
There
we go. Matthew, take a minute and drop in any contact details into the chat of where people can connect with you, find you, those sorts of things. And folks, don't forget we do have our LinkedIn group for Idiotic. I think, Brent, do you have that handy?
I do have that handy. It's just a button away.
Awesome. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention that Idiotic is sponsored by Domino Learning Systems, makers of Domino One. And if it might be of help, I've tossed a link into the chat there with a spot where you can sign up for a free trial, learn more about the tool, see what it's all about. And we're also always obviously happy to talk about it outside of the context of Idiotic too. So, gang, I think that's going to bring us into the end of today's session. The music is playing. The dancing is about to begin again. Matthew, thanks so much for your time today.
Heady.
Absolutely fabulous. Absolute
Loved it.
joy to have you with us, and I'm sure we'll be talking again. And in the meantime, have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
man.
everybody. Dance on out.
There it is. Adios, everybody.